Chapter 1. The Glint in the Shadows. The village of St. Mary Mead was unusually quiet that autumn evening, the kind of stillness that made even the rustling leaves sound like whispers of secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting, needles clicking softly, her sharp eyes occasionally darting to the street beyond. She had always believed that the smallest details, like the way a curtain twitched or a shadow lingered, could unravel the grandest of mysteries. It was just past dusk when the glint caught her eye. A flicker of blue, sharp and unnatural, flashed from the direction of Willow Manor, the grand old house at the edge of the village. The estate had been abuzz lately, ever since Lady Evelyn Ashford had returned from her travels abroad, bringing with her a rumoured treasure, the Sapphire Veil, a jewel said to be cursed with beauty and tragedy. Miss Marple's curiosity stirred. She set her knitting aside and reached for her coat. The manor's lights glowed faintly as she approached, her steps slow but deliberate. The air carried a chill, and with it the faint sound of raised voices. She paused by the wrought-iron gate, peering through the bars. In the garden, two figures stood beneath the ancient willow tree. Lady Evelyn, her silver hair unmistakable even in the dim light, and a man Miss Marple didn't recognize. His voice was low, urgent, but the wind snatched the words away before they reached her. Then came the glint again. It flashed from Lady Evelyn's hand, a sapphire larger than any Miss Marple had ever seen, set in an intricate silver clasp. The man gestured wildly, and Lady Evelyn turned away, clutching the jewel to her chest. A moment later, the garden was empty, the figures vanishing into the manor's shadowed halls. Miss Marple lingered, her mind already threading the needle of suspicion. She had heard the village gossip. The Sapphire Veil wasn't just a gem. It was a legend. Some said it had been stolen from a Maharaja's tomb, others that it drove its owners to madness. Lady Evelyn had laughed off the tales at the last tea-gathering, but her eyes had flickered with something unspoken. As Miss Marple turned to leave, a sharp cry pierced the night. It came from the manor, brief but unmistakable, a sound of terror, cut off as quickly as it began. She froze, her heart quickening. The lights in the manor flickered once, then steadied. Silence returned, heavier than before. By the time she reached home, the village clock struck 9. She settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched. The glint of that sapphire lingered in her mind, as did the cry. Something was amiss at Willow Manor, and Miss Marple knew she wouldn't rest until she uncovered it. Chapter 2. The Sapphire's Keeper. The following morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with a quiet unease. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in a village where secrets were as rare as they were precious. Lady Evelyn Ashford was dead. Found in her drawing-room at Willow Manor, slumped in an armchair, her face frozen in an expression of shock. The Sapphire Veil, the jewel that had sparkled so vividly in her hand the night before, was gone. Miss Marple heard the news over tea with Mrs. Bantry, who had rushed over with the details, her eyes wide with excitement. "They're saying it's her heart," Mrs. Bantry said, stirring her cup vigorously. "But I don't believe it for a moment. Evelyn was fit as a fiddle, climbed the Alps last year, didn't she? And that sapphire vanished. It's too peculiar, Jane." "Peculiar indeed," Miss Marple murmured. her mind already turning over the pieces. A healthy woman dead, a priceless jewel missing, and that cry in the night. It was a puzzle begging to be solved. She decided to pay a visit to Willow Manor under the guise of offering condolences. The manor was a flurry of activity when she arrived. Constable Higgs stood at the door, looking flustered as he waved away curious villagers. Inside, the household staff moved like shadows, their faces pale and drawn. Miss Marple was ushered into the parlour by Clara, Lady Evelyn's young maid, who dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "She was so kind, miss," Clara whispered. "I can't believe she's gone. And that sapphire, she loved it so, wore it every day since she came back." "Did she?" Miss Marple asked gently, her tone encouraging. "And who else was here last night, Clara?" The maid hesitated, then leaned closer. "There was Mr. Rowland, her nephew. He's been staying here a week. And that strange man, Mr. Voss. He came late, after supper. I didn't like him, miss. His eyes were too sharp, like a hawk's." Miss Marple nodded, filing the names away. Rowland Ashford, the nephew, was a lanky young man with a reputation for gambling debts. Mr. Voss, however, was a mystery. A stranger in St. Mary Mead was rare enough to warrant attention. "And did you hear anything unusual last night?" she pressed. Clara's hands twisted the handkerchief. "A shout, miss, from the drawing-room, just before 10. I thought it was Mr. Rowland arguing with her again. He's always after money. But when I went to check, the door was locked. I knocked, but no one answered. Locked." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Thank you, Clara. You've been most helpful." She lingered in the parlour, her gaze drifting to the drawing-room door across the hall. It stood ajar now, revealing a glimpse of plush carpets and a cold fireplace. Constable Higgs emerged, scratching his head. "No sign of a struggle, Miss Marple," he said when he spotted her. "Doctor says it's natural causes, but that jewel's missing and I don't like it." "Nor do I," she replied softly. "Might I take a look?" Higgs shrugged, too overwhelmed to object. Inside the drawing-room, Miss Marple moved with quiet purpose. Lady Evelyn's body had been removed, but the armchair remained, its cushions slightly askew. A teacup sat on the side table, its contents untouched, a faint ring of lipstick on the rim. Near the fireplace, a single sapphire earring lay on the rug. Small, unremarkable, but a clue nonetheless. As she bent to examine it, a shadow fell across the room. She straightened to find Rowland Ashford in the doorway, his face pale and his hands trembling. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Offering my sympathies," Miss Marple said calmly, slipping the earring into her pocket. "And wondering who might have been the last to see your aunt alive." Rowland's eyes flickered, but he said nothing, turning away abruptly. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind humming. The Sapphire Veil had a keeper no longer, but its secrets were only beginning to surface. Chapter 3. Whispers at Willow Manor. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Willow Manor as Miss Marple made her way back to the village. The billet piffer, earring weighed lightly in her pocket, but heavily on her mind. It wasn't the Sapphire Veil, too small, too simple, but its presence on the drawing-room floor hinted at something more. A struggle, perhaps, or a clue dropped in haste. she resolved to dig deeper. Back at her cottage, she settled into her routine: tea, knitting, and thinking. The village grapevine was already twisting with theories. Some whispered of a thief, others of a family feud. Miss Marple knew better than to trust rumours outright, but they often held kernels of truth. Roland Ashford's nervous demeanour and Clara's mention of Mr. Voss lingered in her thoughts. She needed more. That evening, she attended the impromptu gathering at the vicarage, where the village's most talkative souls had convened to mourn Lady Evelyn, or more accurately, to gossip about her demise. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was in fine form, her voice carrying over the clink of teacups. I saw that Mr. Voss myself, skulking about the manor 2 days ago. Foreign he looked, dark hair, sharp suit, not one of us. Did he now? Miss Marple said, feigning mild surprise as she sipped her tea. And what might he have wanted with Lady Evelyn? Money, I'd wager, chimed in Mr. Hartnell the butcher. She was flashing that sapphire about like it was nothing, bound to attract trouble. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Perhaps, though I wonder if it wasn't the sapphire that attracted him, but something else entirely. The conversation shifted, but her words planted seeds of curiosity among the group. She listened as they speculated, noting every name and detail. Roland had been seen at the pub the night before, drowning his sorrows, or his guilt. Mr. Voss, meanwhile, had checked into the Blue Boar Inn, a fact confirmed by the innkeeper's wife, who described him as polite but cold. The next morning, Miss Marple returned to Willow Manor, this time with a basket of scones as her excuse. Clara let her in, looking more composed but still jittery. The police have been poking about, she confided. They're calling it theft now, not murder. But Mr. Roland's furious. Says the sapphire was his inheritance. Was it indeed? Miss Marple mused. And where is Mr. Roland now? Upstairs, packing. Says he's leaving for London tomorrow. Mr. Voss left this morning too. Didn't even say goodbye. Miss Marple thanked her and wandered toward the drawing-room again, this time unnoticed by the distracted staff. The room felt different in daylight, its opulence muted by the absence of its mistress. She examined the fireplace more closely, running her fingers along the mantel. A faint scratch caught her attention, a thin, fresh mark, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. She knelt by the rug where she'd found the earring. A closer look revealed a tiny thread caught in the fibres, blue, shimmering faintly, like the edge of a veil. Her pulse quickened. The sapphire veil wasn't just a jewel. It was part of something larger, perhaps a garment or a disguise. But why leave the earring and take the rest? Footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She rose as Roland entered, his face flushed. "You again," he snapped. "What do you want now?" "Only to understand," she said mildly. "Your aunt's death is a tragedy, but the missing sapphire, it's curious, don't you think? Almost as if someone wanted it hidden." Roland's jaw tightened. "If you're accusing me—" "Not at all," she interrupted, her tone soothing. "But I wonder if Mr. Voss might know more than he's let on. He was here last night, wasn't he?" Roland hesitated, then nodded curtly. "He was. Said he had business with Aunt Evelyn. I didn't ask what. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got things to do." He stormed off, leaving Miss Marple alone with her suspicions. The whispers at Willow Manor were growing louder, and she was beginning to hear the truth beneath them. The Sapphire Veil wasn't just a prize, it was a key. Chapter 4. The Veil unfurls. Miss Marple left Willow Manor with a quiet determination. The blue thread, the sapphire earring, and Roland's evasiveness were threads of a tapestry she was only beginning to see. The Sapphire Veil wasn't merely a stolen jewel. It was a symbol, a piece of a larger design. She decided to follow the trail of Mr. Voss, the mysterious stranger who had slipped away at dawn. At the Blue Boar Inn, the innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Tuttle, was sweeping the porch. She greeted Miss Marple with a nod, her broom pausing mid-stroke. "Come about that Voss fellow, have you?" she said, her voice low. "Odd one he was. Paid in cash, kept to himself. Left before breakfast, said he had a train to catch." "Did he leave anything behind?" Miss Marple asked, her tone casual. Mrs. Tuttle hesitated, then beckoned her inside. "Not much, but there's this." She produced a crumpled piece of paper from her apron pocket. "Found it in his room after he'd gone. Didn't know what to make of it." Miss Marple unfolded the note. It was a rough sketch, a sapphire pendant framed by a flowing veil, with a single word scrawled beneath: midnight. Her mind raced. Midnight could mean a time, a place, or even a code. She thanked Mrs. Tuttle and tucked the paper into her handbag, her next stop already clear. The train station. The station master, a wiry man named Mr. Gibbs, remembered Voss well. "Caught the 6:15 to London," he said, chewing on a pipe. "Looked in a hurry. Carried a small case, black leather, locked tight. Didn't speak to a soul." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the locked case. The Sapphire Veil, perhaps, or something more. She returned home, spreading her clues across the kitchen table: the earring, the thread, the sketch. As she studied them, a pattern began to emerge. The earring wasn't a match for the veil's grandeur. It was a decoy, a distraction. The real jewel, she suspected, was still close, hidden in plain sight. That evening, she attended the village sewing circle, a perfect place to listen and observe. The women chattered about Lady Evelyn's death, their needles flashing in the lamplight. Miss Marple steered the conversation gently. "Such a pity about the sapphire," she sighed, "though I wonder if it was ever really gone." Mrs. Bantry perked up. "What do you mean, Jane? The police say it's stolen." "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, "but things aren't always what they seem. A jewel like that, it might be cloaked, waiting to be found." The room buzzed with speculation, but Miss Marple's attention shifted to Clara, who had joined the circle at the last minute. The maid's hands trembled as she stitched, her eyes darting nervously. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the faint blue stain on her sleeve, barely visible but unmistakable. After the circle dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, offering to help Clara tidy up. "You've been so brave through all this," she said kindly. "It must be hard, working at the manor now." Clara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not the same without her, and I keep hearing things. Footsteps, late at night. I think someone's still there." "Still there?" Miss Marple echoed, her tone gentle but probing. Clara bit her lip. "In the attic. I didn't tell the police, I was too scared. But last night I heard it again, and I found this." She pulled a small key from her pocket, its head shaped like a tiny sapphire. "It was under Lady Evelyn's chair. I didn't know what to do with it." Miss Marple took the key, her fingers brushing its cool surface. "You've done the right thing, Clara. Leave this with me." As she walked home, the key felt like a promise. The sapphire veil was unfurling, its secret stretching beyond the manor's walls. The attic, the midnight note, the fleeing Mr. Voss. It was all connected. She just needed to find the locket fit. Chapter 5. A Dance of Deception. Miss Marple sat by her fireplace that night, the sapphire-shaped key glinting in the flickering light. Its delicate craftsmanship suggested it belonged to something specific. A box, a drawer, perhaps a hidden compartment. Clara's mention of footsteps in the attic gnawed at her. Willow Manor held more than memories. It harboured a secret, and she intended to uncover it. The next morning, she returned to the manor, armed with a plausible excuse, delivering a shawl she'd knitted for Clara. The house was quieter now, the police presence reduced to a single constable lounging by the gate. Clara met her at the door, her eyes red-rimmed but grateful. "You're too kind, miss," she said, clutching the shawl. "It's been so lonely here." "Lonely, yes," Miss Marple replied, stepping inside. "Though not entirely empty, I gather. Might I trouble you for a look upstairs? I've always admired the manor's architecture." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Just be quick. Mr. Rowland's still about, and he's in a foul mood." Miss Marple climbed the grand staircase, her steps soft on the worn carpet. The attic door was at the end of a narrow hall, its paint chipped and its lock small but sturdy. She slipped the key from her pocket and turned it. The mechanism clicked smoothly, and the door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase shrouded in dust. The attic was a maze of shadows, cluttered with trunks, old furniture and cobwebs. A faint draught carried the scent of lavender, Lady Evelyn's favourite. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. Near the far wall, beneath a cracked skylight, she found it. A small wooden box, its lid inlaid with a sapphire design. The key fit perfectly, and the lid sprang open. Inside lay a bundle of silk, blue, shimmering, and impossibly light. She unfolded it carefully, revealing the sapphire veil in all its glory. Not just a jewel, but a pendant sewn into a gossamer veil, its edges frayed but intact. It was breathtaking, a work of art that seemed to pulse with its own life. But why hide it here? And who had placed it? A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to find Roland Ashford in the doorway, his face a mask of fury. "What are you doing?" he snarled, advancing toward her. "That's mine." "Is it?" Miss Marple said calmly, folding the veil back into the box. "I rather think it belonged to your aunt. And now it's evidence." Roland lunged, but she stepped aside, her small frame surprisingly nimble. "You don't understand," he spat. "She promised it to me. Voss was going to buy it, pay off my debts. But she changed her mind, said it was too dangerous." "Dangerous?" Miss Marple echoed, her voice steady. "Or too valuable to let go?" Before he could answer, Clara's voice rang out from below. "Mr. Rowland, the police are back!" He froze, his eyes darting between Miss Marple and the stairs. Then, With a curse, he bolted, shoving past her and disappearing down the hall. Miss Marple tucked the box under her arm and descended, her mind whirling. Roland's desperation confirmed her suspicions. He'd known about the Veil's hiding place. But his mention of Voss and danger hinted at a deeper game. Had Lady Evelyn died to protect the jewel, or to keep it secret? At the foot of the stairs, Constable Higgs met her, his brow furrowed. What's all this, then? Clara said there was a row. No row, Miss Marple said, handing him the box. Just a discovery. You'll want to look at this and find Mr. Roland. He's got some explaining to do. Higgs opened the box, his jaw dropping at the sight of the sapphire veil. Blimey! Where'd you— The attic, she said simply. But I suspect the real story lies with Mr. Voss. He's not in London for a holiday. As Higgs radioed for backup, Miss Marple stepped outside, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. The dance of deception had begun, and she was determined to lead it to its final step. Chapter 6. The Locked Room Riddle. The discovery of the Sapphire Veil sent ripples through St. Mary Mead, but for Miss Marple it was only the beginning. The veil was back in police custody. Roland was detained for questioning, and yet the heart of the mystery, Lady Evelyn's death, remained unsolved. The drawing room, where she'd been found, was a locked room riddle. No signs of forced entry, no weapon, just a teacup and a missing jewel. Miss Marple knew the answer lay in the details. She returned to Willow Manor the next day, this time with Constable Higgs's reluctant permission. "Just don't touch anything," he grumbled, trailing behind her as she entered the drawing room. The air was stale, the silence heavy. She stood by the armchair where Lady Evelyn had died, picturing the scene. A woman alone, a cry in the night, a locked door. Her eyes fell on the teacup again. It sat on the side table, its contents cold and untouched. She leaned closer, noting the faint lipstick mark. Lady Evelyn's shade, a soft rose. But something else caught her attention. A tiny residue at the bottom, a powdery film that didn't belong in tea. "Constable," she said, pointing, "have you had this tested?" Higgs frowned. "The tea? Doctor said it was her heart. Natural causes. No need for that." "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild but firm. "But I'd suggest you do. A healthy woman doesn't simply collapse, not without help." Higgs muttered something about meddling old ladies, but radioed for the lab nonetheless. Miss Marple moved on, her gaze sweeping the room. The fireplace scratch she'd noticed earlier still intrigued her. She knelt by it, running her finger along the mark. It was deeper than she'd thought, and beside it a faint smudge of blue shimmered. Residue from the veil, perhaps? She straightened, her mind turning to the locked door. Clara had said it was shut tight when she'd knocked that night, yet Roland and Voss had been in the house. How had they left, or entered, without a key? She examined the door itself, its heavy oak unmarred by scratches or dents. The lock was old but functional, and the key hung on a hook in the hall, untouched since the police arrived. A memory flickered. Clara's words about footsteps in the attic. Miss Marple glanced upward. The drawing-room ceiling was high, adorned with ornate plasterwork, but directly above was the attic. She recalled the skylight she'd seen there, cracked but large enough for a man to slip through. "Constable," she said, Might we check the roof?" Higgs groaned but followed her outside. A ladder from the gardener's shed got them to the manor's sloped roof, where the attic skylight sat, its frame loose and weathered. Miss Marple peered through the glass, spotting scuff marks on the inner ledge. Fresh, deliberate. "Someone climbed out," she said. "Or in." "Blimey," Higgs muttered, scratching his head. But why? The veil was still here. "Exactly," Miss Marple replied. "The veil wasn't the goal, not then. It was a distraction." Inside, she pieced it together. Lady Evelyn had locked herself in, perhaps sensing danger. Someone, Voss or Roland, had used the attic to bypass the door, entering or escaping after her death. The teacup suggested poison, a silent killer that left no trace of struggle. But why leave the veil behind, only to hide it later? Her thoughts were interrupted by Higgs's radio crackling. "Lab's got the tea results," a voice reported. "Traces of cyanide. Looks like murder after all." Miss Marple nodded, unsurprised. The locked room wasn't a riddle anymore. It was a trap, carefully set. Roland had motive, Voss had opportunity, but the Sapphire Veil tied them together. She needed to find Voss, and fast. As she left the manor, a shadow moved in the garden, the same spot where she'd seen Lady Evelyn and Voss that first night. She squinted, but it vanished behind the willow tree. The riddle was solved, but the game wasn't over. Chapter 7. Echoes of a Stolen Night. The revelation of cyanide in Lady Evelyn's tea turned St. Mary Mead upside down. By evening, the village was alive with whispers. Murder, not misfortune, had claimed Willow Manor's mistress. Miss Marple, however, felt no triumph in being right. A life lost was never a victory. Her focus shifted to Mr. Voss, the elusive stranger whose shadow seemed to stretch across every clue. She sat in her cottage, the sapphire earring and the midnight sketch laid out before her. The earring, a decoy, had been left to mislead. Sketch with its single word hinted at a plan. Midnight. The night Lady Evelyn died, Clara had heard a shout just before 10. Too early for the sketch's timeline. Voss had fled at dawn, but his departure felt staged, a feint to throw off pursuit. Miss Marple suspected he hadn't gone far. She telephoned Mrs. Bantry, whose knack for gossip rivaled her own for observation. "Dolly, have you heard anything about Mr. Voss since he left the Blue Boar?" Mrs. Bantry's voice crackled with excitement. "Funny you should ask, Jane. Old Mr. Gibbs at the station swears he saw Voss double back after the train left, headed toward the woods, not London. Said he looked shifty, carrying that black case. The woods," Miss Marple murmured. Beyond Willow Manor lay a dense thicket, rarely visited save by poachers and children. A perfect hiding spot. "Thank you, Dolly. I may need your car later." She hung up, her plan forming. Voss was the key. His business with Lady Evelyn, his flight, the veil's brief disappearance. Roland had confessed to hiding the jewel in the attic, claiming he'd panicked after finding his aunt dead, but he denied murder. Miss Marple believed him partly. His greed was clear, but his hands shook too much for Poison's steady work. At dusk, she borrowed Mrs. Bantry's car and drove to the wood's edge, parking near a crumbling stone wall. The air was thick with pine and damp earth as she stepped into the trees, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. She moved slowly, ears straining for any sound. Then a faint echo, a twig snapping, a low curse. She followed it, her heart steady despite the dark. In a small clearing she found him. Mr. Voss knelt by a fallen log, his black case open beside him. He was older than she'd imagined, his sharp features softened by fatigue, but his eyes gleamed with a predator's focus. He held a vial, small, glass, half empty. Cyanide, she guessed. "Good evening, Mr. Voss," she said, stepping in too, the light. "I see you've not gone far." He jolted upright, the vial slipping to the ground. "You!" he hissed, recognizing her from village gossip. "What do you want?" "The truth," she replied calmly. "Lady Evelyn's death wasn't an accident, and you know it. The Sapphire Veil was yours once, wasn't it?" Voss's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "It was mine, stolen from me years ago in Bombay. Evelyn bought it off a dealer, thinking it was hers to flaunt. I came to take it back." "And killed her for it?" Miss Marple pressed. He laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "No, she was dead. When I got there, already cold. I climbed in through the attic, saw the veil on the table and took it. But Roland burst in, ranting about debts. I hid it upstairs and ran." Miss Marple studied him, weighing his words. "Then who poisoned her?" Voss shrugged, his gaze flickering to the vial. "I don't know. I found that in the garden after. Thought it was Roland's. He's a fool, but not that clever." It nodded, the echoes of that night sharpening. Voss was a thief, not a murderer. The real killer had struck earlier, leaving the veil as bait. But who? As she turned to leave, Voss lunged for his case, only to freeze as headlights pierced the trees. Constable Higgs emerged, flanked by officers. "Stay where you are," Higgs barked, cuffing Voss. "Miss Marple, you've got some explaining to do. Later," she said, her mind already elsewhere. The stolen night had revealed much, but not all. The killer was still out there, cloaked in shadows. Chapter 8. The Jewel's Secret with Mr. Voss in custody. St. Mary Mead breathed a collective sigh of relief. But Miss Marple knew the puzzle was incomplete. Voss's tale rang true. A thief, not a murderer, caught in the aftermath of a crime he hadn't committed. The cyanide vial from the garden pointed elsewhere, and the Sapphire Veil, now safe in police hands, whispered a secret she hadn't yet grasped. She returned to her cottage, brewing a pot of tea as she sifted through the clues. The locked room, the poisoned tea, the veil's brief disappearance. Each piece fit, yet the picture eluded her. Lady Evelyn had enemies, perhaps, but who hated her enough to kill? Roland's greed was clumsy, Voss's theft opportunistic. Someone else had slipped through the cracks. Her thoughts drifted to Clara, the nervous maid with the blue-stained sleeve. The girl had been helpful, almost too eager, yet her story held gaps. The shout at 10, the locked door, the attic key. Clara had been there, always on the edges. Miss Marple recalled the sewing circle, the faint shimmer on Clara's arm. Not dye, she realized, but residue from the veil itself. The next morning, she visited Willow Manor once more. Clara was in the kitchen, scrubbing pots with a vigour that bordered on frantic. "Miss Marple," she said, startled, dropping a sponge. "I didn't expect you." "Just a few questions, dear." Miss Marple replied, settling at the table. "You've been so helpful, but I wonder, did Lady Evelyn ever mention the Sapphire Veil's history?" Clara's hands stilled. "She said it was cursed. Brought her nothing but trouble. I thought she was joking. Did you?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, probing. "And that night, when you heard the shout, where were you exactly?" "Outside the drawing-room," Clara said quickly. "I told you, the door was locked." "Indeed. Yet you found the key under her chair later. Odd, don't you think, that it wasn't on the hook?" Clara paled, her fingers twisting in her apron. I don't know. Maybe it fell." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Or maybe you took it, Clara. You served her tea that night, didn't you? And you knew the veil's worth, not just its price, but its power over her." The maid's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Miss Marple continued softly, "that the jewel's secret wasn't its curse, but its hold on you. Lady Evelyn treated you well, but she flaunted her wealth, didn't she? Kept you small. And when Voss came, offering a deal, you saw a chance." Clara shook her head, tears welling. "No, I didn't." "You poisoned the tea," Miss Marple pressed, relentless now. "A small dose, slow to act. You locked the door, staged the shout to draw attention, then slipped the vial into the garden. Voss took the veil, Roland hid it, but you started it all." The kitchen was silent, save for Clara's ragged breathing. Then, with a sob, she crumpled. "She laughed at me," she whispered, "called me a nobody. I found the cyanide in the shed, meant for rats. I just wanted her to stop." Miss Marple sighed, her heart heavy. "And the veil?" "I touched it once," Clara admitted, "before Voss came. It was so beautiful. I didn't mean for all this." Footsteps sounded outside. Constable Higgs, summoned by a quiet call Miss Marple had made earlier. He entered, taking in Clara's confession with a grim nod. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, cuffing the girl. "How do you know?" "The little things," she replied, rising. "They always tell the truth." As Clara was led away, Miss Marple lingered, gazing at the manor's faded grandeur. The Sapphire Veil had cloaked a murder, but its real secret was the envy it sparked, a jewel that dazzled and destroyed. Chapter 9. Threads of Truth. The arrest of Clara sent a shockwave through St. Mary Mead, quieter but no less profound than the discovery of Lady Evelyn's murder. The village had seen her as a timid maid, a shadow in the manor's halls, not a killer driven by resentment. Miss Marple, however, felt no surprise, only a pang of sadness for a young life unravelled by envy. The Sapphire Veil had claimed more than one victim. She sat in her parlour the following evening, knitting a scarf as she reviewed the case. Clara's confession had filled the gaps. The poisoned tea, the locked door, the staged shout. Yet questions lingered. The veil's journey, stolen by Voss, hidden by Roland, touched by Clara, suggested a deeper pull, a magnetism that drew out the worst in those around it. Miss Marple wondered if Lady Evelyn had known its power, or if she'd been blind to the storm she'd stirred. Constable Higgs arrived at her door, hat in hand, looking sheepish. "Thought you'd want to know, Miss Marple," he said, stepping inside. "Clara's talking more. Says she overheard Voss and Lady Evelyn arguing that night. before the tea. Something about a debt, not just the jewel." "A debt?" Miss Marple paused, her needles still. "Go on." Seems Voss claimed the sapphire was payment, owed to him from years back. Lady Evelyn refused, said she'd bought it fair. Clara heard it all from the hall, then brought the tea. She swears she didn't plan it till that moment. Miss Marple nodded, the threads tightening. Spur of the moment, perhaps, but the cyanide was ready. She'd thought about it before. Higgs rubbed his neck. Aye, and Rowland's cleared, mostly. He's a fool, not a murderer. Admitted to grabbing the veil after Voss left, hiding it to sell later. Didn't know about the poison Roscoe'd up, but he's got a point. "Fair enough," Miss Marple said. "And Mr. Voss?" "Sticking to his story," Higgs replied. "Says he climbed in to take the veil, found her dead, and ran. We've got him for theft, but not murder." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind sharp. The Sapphire Veil's history might tell us more. It's not just a jewel, it's a legend. I'd wager Lady Evelyn knew its past, and it frightened her. Higgs frowned. "You think it's really cursed?" "Not cursed," she said gently, "but coveted. It's the wanting that kills." Later, she visited the manor one last time, drawn by a need to close the circle. The drawing room was empty now, its grandeur faded. She stood by the fireplace, tracing the scratch where the veil had brushed. In her pocket, the sapphire earring gleamed, a keepsake, a reminder of the little things. Back home, she wrote a letter to a friend at the British Museum, asking about the Sapphire Veil's origins. Days later, a reply arrived. It had been looted from a Bombay temple in 1890, tied to a string of deaths, owners driven mad or murdered. Lady Evelyn had bought it from a shady dealer, unaware or uncaring of its bloody trail. Miss Marple tucked the letter away, satisfied. The truth was clear. No curse, just human frailty, greed, envy, desperation. Clara's trial loomed, Voss faced jail, and Rowland slunk off to London, penniless. The Sapphire Veil, locked in evidence, would dazzle no more. She picked up her knitting, the rhythm soothing. The threads of truth had woven a sad tale, but justice, at least, had prevailed. Chapter 10. The final masquerade spring arrived in St. Mary Mead with a gentle thaw, softening the edges of a winter marked by murder. The Sapphire Veil case had faded from the village's chatter, replaced by the usual gossip of births and bake sales. For Miss Marple, however, it lingered, a tapestry fully woven, its final stitches set with care. Clara's trial had been swift. She pleaded guilty, her confession tearful but resolute. The judge, moved by her youth and remorse, sentenced her to 15 years, a harsh lesson, but not a life lost. Mr. Voss, convicted of theft, received a shorter term, his sharp eyes dulled by prison walls. Rowland Ashford, chastened and broke, vanished to London, leaving Willow Manor to gather dust under a distant cousin's care. Miss Marple sat in her garden, the sapphire earring resting on the table beside her tea. It caught the sunlight, a small echo of the veil's lost brilliance. She'd kept it, not as a trophy, but as a memento of the human frailties she'd untangled. The Sapphire Veil itself remained in a police vault, its fate undecided. Too valuable to destroy, too dangerous to display. A visitor interrupted her reverie. Mrs. Bantry, bustling in with a newspaper. "Jane, you'll never guess," she exclaimed, flapping the pages. "They're saying the Sapphire's going to a museum. Anonymous donation. No more murders, they hope." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "A wise choice. It's best cloaked in glass now, not greed." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, fanning herself. "You solved it all, didn't you? Clara, Voss, the lot. How'd you do it?" "The little things, Dolly," Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. "A thread, a shout, a look. People hide, but their habits don't." She thought back to that first night, the glint in the shadows, the cry that pierced the silence. It had been a masquerade of motives. Clara's envy, Voss's vengeance, Roland's desperation. Lady Evelyn, in her pride, had worn the veil like a crown, unaware it was her shroud. The jewel hadn't killed her, but it had drawn the darkness out of those around her. Later, Miss Marple walked to the churchyard, where Lady Evelyn's grave lay beneath a blooming cherry tree. She placed a single daisy on the stone, a quiet tribute to a woman undone by her own dazzle. "You loved it too much," she murmured, "but it's at rest now." Back home, she settled by her window, knitting needles clicking once more. The village hummed with life beyond her curtains. Ordinary, predictable, safe. The Sapphire Veil's curse was no more than a story now, its power broken by the light of truth. As dusk fell, a final thought crossed her mind. The world was full of veils, cloaking secrets in plain sight. She'd lift them, one by one, as long as her eyes stayed sharp and her heart stayed steady. For now, though, St. Mary Mead was at peace, and that was enough. The end.